What are the rules of investigation? Basic principles. Make duplicate copies of the evidence and then protect the evidence. Now, when we look at the evidence and we make those copies of it, every once in a while, we change it. There are rules in the court that say don't ever change the evidence. But here's the thing. If it's a cell phone, remember, phones are continually talking. They're trying to get signaling information in from the tower. That means that this piece of evidence has changed. They're talking Bluetooth, they're talking Wi-Fi, they're talking CDMA or GSM. They're continually doing all these activities. So when it comes in our possession, well, it may change a little bit when we have it. And the court says, well, in a material way, you've done everything that you can to protect it from change, and here's the important thing, and you've recorded the changes that were occurring, and this is how you limited them. Classic example when it comes to cell phones is using something like a Faraday cage to stop all the external communications, but still allow the device to interact with you at that moment in time. That way you can actually pull the data. The other place that this happens a lot when it says when we record the modifications is when we do RAM dumps of particular machines. Unless you have a very, very specific type of physical RAM dumping tool, which there's only one of at this point that I know of, maybe if there are more, please tell me about them, you have to install some sort of activity, a minimal footprint, but you know exactly what those DLLs do, and then they actually extract that RAM from the kernel side. By the way, your RAM dumping utilities always want to be kernel side, not user side. And now we're definitely making a change to the operating system at that point, unless we got that agent on the machine before the activity happened. That would be great in forensics if we actually had the DLL there and proved that the machine was consistent before this activity and then just pulled the RAM dump. Most of the time we don't get that. We have to record how we have changed it and to what degree, because the court says, well, just because you've changed it a little bit and we got all these mountains of evidence, that doesn't mean that little change may have tainted this evidence by 1 or 2%, but that 1 or 2% is not reasonable doubt when it comes to 32,000 entries in a database of you selling illicit materials. Just not strong enough. We'll let it go. Remember, you as the forensics investigator are going to help the organization, you're going to help law enforcement, you're going to help those prosecutors actually get a hold of those criminals and stop that activity. Let's talk about accessing the computer forensics resources. What can you reach out to? Who should you be reaching out to? Now, first off, when you're doing this and you're doing your research right now, I would say to you, build up a large resource of reliable resources out there that you can go and do an investigation on. Here's a classic example of a great resource that's out there. When we're dealing with the Microsoft operating system and we talk about the formatting of that, we talk about NTFS. There's a great site out there called ntfs.com, and it talks about all the iterations of the NTFS from a third-party standpoint, and it's collected off this data, and it's scientifically said, this is how we do this, and this is how we prove this. You say, well, Dean, I don't trust internet sites. You know, they could be lying to me. Okay, well, great. Reach out to the original inventors of this, of the Microsoft people internally, and look at something like sysinternals, some of the Russinovich and Solomon books on the internals of the operating system, and you can read it there. There's plenty of sites out there that you should be reaching out to, and then I would go to the next level. I would start working with, before you have to, I would start working with law enforcement. Think about HTCIA, you have a local chapter around you where law enforcement and forensics investigators get together and they can talk in a very frank manner beforehand. You want to get used to law enforcement and talking to them and working with them and knowing those contacts before you have to pick up the phone and say, hey, I need your help, we've been hacked. Now, when we talk about the role of digital evidence, what we say is some intruders are going to bypass our security settings, or maybe there weren't any security settings at that point on that victim's computer, and they're going to leave evidence there, and then they're going to take evidence away with them. Now, this is called something very important. It's called Locard's principle. We can just say it's evidence exchange. Now, I really like what Casey had to say in his book, and here's the quote. The main goal in any investigation are to follow the trails that offenders leave during the commission of a crime and to tie the perpetrator to the victims and the crime scene. Now, this is an old principle. It's called Locard's exchange principle. So what's going to happen is contact between two items will result in an exchange. In this case, when two cars bang into each other, they do this thing that they call in NASCAR, they call it trading paint. Because some of your paint pops off on my car and some of my paint pops off on your car. And that's what we do in Locard's principle. You go, oh, Dean, that's awfully silly. Well, let's talk about where Locard's principle happens all the time. So you put on your CSI hat and you go, okay, what did the criminal leave at the crime scene? They're always dusting for fingerprints. Okay, that's what they left behind. That's evidence that they were there. Okay, now we sneak over to the attacker's lair and we say, okay, well, we want to look inside of your house because you're a suspect in a crime and they let the police in. Sure, go ahead and look around. And they go, well, what are these fibers right here? What are these hairs? How did they get here? They're not your hair. Hey, we're going to go send these down to the crime lab to test it out for DNA, and we'll find out that it was the victim's hair. How do you know the victim? What do you mean you don't know this person? Well, you've got their hair in your house. How did it get here? Did they sneak into your house? Or was it caught on the corner of your coat when you were actually killing them? So something was left behind and something was taken with you. Now we're going to have to reach out and we're going to have to extend this. So let's extrapolate for a second. We have to ask ourselves, what is Locard's exchange for a digital crime scene? So, this is the first exercise, and we're going to try something else in a second. When you visit a website, what happens? What do you leave behind? Well, in the web log, it says you visited, and these are the pages that you went to. Even if you didn't do any evil activity. If you did evil activity, maybe more activities are logged. Maybe you walked the whole website to look at everything that's on there. Maybe the adversary did an automatic download of all of the entire site all at one time to a particular IP address. Hey, wait a minute. You're not supposed to be crawling my whole site and pulling all that data back to you. That's inappropriate activity. Collect that up over time. What did you take with you? What do you have on your side if you went to my website? Cookies, right? They're installed inside of your browser. Now, as a forensics investigator, what we have to do is we have to investigate the victim, website at this point, pulling those logs, collecting that information. And then we have to get a hold of the attacker. How are we going to do that? See, now we got a jurisdictional issue. Now we have to get law enforcement involved in it. And we say, well, we don't actually know whether it was actually there or not. We have to go to the victim's computer, say, okay, how do we know that they're there? We've got this evidence here. Go to their law enforcement. And now they're giving us this stuff back. So they're taking something with them. Now, this was the easy one. And let's take that next step. Do you have GPS in your car? Do you have messages that you've sent in email? Remember, the records of messages happen all the time. It happens on mail servers. It happens on your website that you actually went to, even if you were doing a free mail account. And then all that data is downloaded to your computer. Especially if you're reading it, and especially if you've got your own rich mail client locally. We could start looking at GPS information that you may be trading with us, that you may be giving to us. Here, let me email you a picture. I'm going to take a picture of you on my phone. Okay, I'm going to send you that picture. You can know exactly where I am if I send you that picture. How? Well, let's take a look. If I take a picture and I send it to you, inside of that file, there's going to be certain evidence. Okay, now, I want you to start doing your first piece of sleuthing. So you get to play CSI just for a second here. I want you to look at the fact that we have this Coolpix camera right here, and it says the date and the time of this picture was at this time. And we look at all the evidence in there. Now look at what you see on your screen and tell me something. Why doesn't this make sense? Here's your hint. This is not Alaska. This is not Iceland. This is not the frozen tundra of Russia. So what's wrong with this picture? What time is the picture taken? Now look at the picture. If it was that time, would there be clouds? Would there be sunlight? See, we have to start sleuthing our way through this. But let's pretend for a moment in time that this was actually correct. Instead of 10:15 p.m., it said 10:15 a.m. What could we do? Well, we could dig into the EXIF data, and we could find out GPS-wise that the camera actually wrote information to the particular picture. The metadata of the picture says Dean was at these coordinates at this time. He took this information, and when he did it on his iPhone, because it's this kind of iPhone, or he did it with this particular camera, and this particular camera has these variables in it and these failures in it. Maybe it doesn't take that particular pixel correctly, or there's a distortion in the lens, and we could take that data and say, okay, we think that this was Dean that took this picture at this time, that he sent it to us. Let's now go take a look at Dean's phone, and you pull my phone, you download that, and you actually take a reference picture from my phone and say, yep, in fact, the picture that we have here and the picture that was sent to us are from the same device. And we found this device in Dean's possession for a long period of time. The camera settings and all the different variables that are inside of this particular machine are really close to unique. We almost have a virtual fingerprint on every particular file that is sent out. Whether we can get to the actual original picture-taking device and actually create those reference shots is a totally different thing, and that gets into the search and seizure issues that we're not going to talk about right now.